Alright, so let's continue on with the texturing for the house. So I'm going to create a new V-Ray material, V-Ray advanced material. And we're going to call this one concrete. And this one's going to be the concrete that's going to go on the bottom portion of the house here. Because you can see up towards the top story has this paneling out here. And down along the bottom there is no paneling, it's just a flat wall. Now over here we also have some paneling here, but we're going to make this wood paneling just to kind of offset it. That way it's not all a concrete and stucco type look. So we're going to add a wood texture to that. And then of course this over here is flat, but then up here as well we've got more paneling. So right now we're just going to work on the texture that we're going to use for this flat part of the wall here. So in the texture folder, and I'll just open this material back up, we'll go to the diffuse layer. So in the texture folder, there are two textures here called concrete and stucco. So if we look at concrete, I figured maybe what we could do is use this one for the paneling on the upper floor of the house. And we can use the stucco texture here for the bottom walls that are flat, that don't have any paneling on them. So we'll just grab this stucco texture and pull it in over here to the diffuse layer. And we also want to activate the bump, and we're just going to reuse this stucco texture. So what we'll do is we'll right click here on texture map and we'll click copy. We'll go over to bump, turn it on, and then we'll just right click on texture map here for the bump channel, and we'll choose paste. That will paste that in there, and then we can just take the bump amount and we'll turn that up maybe to 2. So let's make this here, let's open this window, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Alright, so let's try to take the bump, and let me just pull this out of the way so we can see it, and I'll take the bump up to really high number, like maybe 5. So we'll give that a second to update. Alright, so 5 might be a little too much. I don't know. We're going to leave it at 5 for the moment, but we may need to come back and kind of change that and bring it down some. Right here in this little small viewport preview, it actually looks pretty good here. With this material preview, it looks good, but once we apply it to the house and scale it down, it might be a little too much. Alright, now we also need to do the same with specular. However, this material is not going to have a lot of specular because it's just flat concrete. So what we'll do is go over to the specular layer 1 and we'll turn that on. You can see there's some reflection in that, so we really don't need that. So let's just deactivate trace reflection. And we'll go over here to the highlight glossiness. You can see it's at 0.5. So let's turn that up just a little bit. Okay, that's too much. So I guess maybe the value of 0.5, the default value, is going to work for us. And we also want to paste in the stucco material that we copied from the diffuse layer. Alright, now we can use the specular layer transparency area here or the specular color. So let's try the specular color first. So let's right click and choose paste. And you can see that it really did not have much of an effect there. So if we were to take this value down here for the mix strength to 0, and you can see there in the preview it brightened up just a little bit. So it is having an effect. So let's push that back up, and you can see it kind of tones down just a little bit. It's not a lot, it's just something very subtle. So I think that will work for now because we really don't want to have a lot of specular on this concrete stucco type material. So I'm just going to adjust the name here to concrete stucco, and then we just need to apply it to the wall. Now the house right now, if we go into the house, and here's the house framing, so if I turn that off, okay, you can see that that's pretty much what we need to apply that texture to. So what we'll do is we'll take this concrete material here, this stucco, and we'll apply it over here to the house framing object. And we need to change the projection to cubic. We need to zoom in to take a look, and I think more than likely that might be pretty good as far as the scale goes. So let's grab the texture axis tool here, and you can see just the scale of the projection, and I think that's going to work pretty well. We don't want to make it any bigger, otherwise the stucco will look too big, and if we scale this down anymore, what's going to happen is we're going to get a lot of repeating patterns. So I think just this scale of where it's at will be just fine. So we don't need to mess with that. So I'm going to jump back into the camera, and I'm just going to render a little region right there. And I just want to see what this material is going to look like, because remember, we turned the bump up to 5. So I just want to make sure that there's not going to be excess bump on the wall. Okay, so that looks fine to me. There's a little bit of bump there. You can tell the anti-aliasing again has been turned down rather low, so it's going to be kind of hard to tell, but I don't see a lot of excess bump going on there. So we'll just leave it at a value of 5, and of course, if we have to, we can always come back later and change it. All right, now the next thing we want to do is apply some material to these walls out here. We've got this little wall here, this one here, and I believe this wall over here is part of the house, which it is, so we don't need to worry about that. We just need to apply this material to this wall and that one there. So I'm going to create a new V-Ray shader, advanced, and we're just going to call this wall. I'm going to go down to the diffuse layer, and let's open up the texture folder again, and the one that I want here is going to be called 20110 color. This is the one that we're going to use on the wall, because the wall is going to be a dirty type of wall. So we'll just drag that into the diffuse layer here. That looks good, and we need to go activate the bump. And we need to drag the bump image into the bump channel here. So I'm going to open this up again because I want to be able to see what the bump is going to look like. So right now the bump is going in the wrong way. I actually want to take the bump in. So let's give this a negative value of something like -5. So just give it a second to update the preview, and that might be a little too much. So let's split that in half. So let's just say maybe -2. A little bit more than half, but -2. Okay, so that looks fine. I'd rather have a wall that has holes and pits in it versus a bump that's kind of extending outward. All right, so we need to apply this to the wall. So I'm going to go find the wall object. There's the front wall. So we'll take this, apply it to the front wall, and I need to jump out of the camera so we can kind of zoom in up on the wall. Just need to make sure that the texture looks proper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it over to cubic, and that actually looks a little better. Now if you want to leave it at UVW, you're welcome to do that, but I'm just going to change it to cubic and just leave the scaling of the cubic projection where it's at. Okay, so we're going to do the same for the other wall, which is back here. So I'm just going to take this wall object and bring it up here with the other one, and I'm just going to duplicate that material to it. And you notice what we've got here. We've got a little bit of a repeating pattern on the wall. You can see we've got this dark spot here, and I'll just zoom into it. We've got this area here with this kind of triangle pattern here, and then it repeats over here on this side. So I kind of want to get rid of that. So let's select the material and the object, go to the texture axis mode, and what we need to do is just kind of scale this up a little bit and then push it in one direction. And what that's going to do is it's going to alleviate that repeating pattern that we had there. And we also need to do the same for that wall over there. And you can see that that material is way down there. So let's bring it back in this direction and just scale it up a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, now I want to be able to apply a snow shader to this, like kind of like a light dusting of snow that's just kind of been on the wall. So let's try our snow dusting material here, and let's apply that to the front wall. And we need to change it over to cubic. And let's go grab the texture axis tool here, and let's just scale that up to where it encompasses around the entire wall. And we need to turn on the mixed textures for that. We'll jump back into our camera, and I just want to render, I'll tell you what, let's get up close to it here. And I want to render just a little region of the wall here. And I want to see what this snow dusting shader is going to look like up against the wall. Okay, so there's the snow shader on the wall. Some areas might look a little too thick, but I think it looks pretty good. What we could do if we wanted to change that is we could take this material and just duplicate it, because this is the one that's going to be on the leads. This one here is going to be snow dusting for the walls. So we'll go back into the noise shader for the material weight channel, and we need to adjust this to where it's not so heavy or not so contrasted. So we'll just kind of take these values and play around with these values a little bit here. So we'll take the brightness and take the brightness down. I think that's probably going to intensify it, yeah. So we need to take the brightness up, so maybe something like 30, and we'll take the contrast down to -25. All right, and then we'll take this new snow shader here, and we'll put that on the wall and just overwrite the original one that was there. And then we'll just render this one more time. All right, so that almost looks identical to what we had on there before, just not as white as it was. So of course, you know, it just depends on what you want to do. Do you want to have a wall really covered in snow or just a light dusting? So either way, the wall texture itself, remember, was white or a light shade of gray with those brown dark spots. So either way you look at it, the wall is going to be white. All right, so we're going to take the same material and apply it over to the second wall over there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is add the wood texture for this part of the wall over here, which is this paneling. So this is going to be wall paneling. This is going to be for the wood, so we need to make a new V-Ray material again. And we're going to go to the diffuse layer. And we need to pick this wood texture right here. So we're going to click on that one and drag that in over here for the diffuse. And more than likely, we may not need to add any type of bump or anything like that. And the reason for not having any bump is simply because this wall has already been modeled. So you can see there's already grooves in there. So those grooves should serve the purpose that we need of adding a little depth to the wall. So we'll take this new material, and I'm just going to rename it to wood paneling. And we'll drop that over here to the wood paneling object. All right, so we've got some lines in there, and I just want to make sure. Let's open this. I'll tell you what, instead of opening up there, let's open it up in the texture folder just to look at it here. And we've got part of this area here, which is dark. And looks like water staining down at the bottom. So I need to make sure, let's go back over here to this material here. May need to render just to see what this looks like, because sometimes the textures look a little weird in the viewport compared to how they will look when you render them. So I'm just going to render this little area with this wood paneling just to make sure that we don't have any repeating lines, because you can see we've got some dark vertical lines in there, and I just want to make sure that we're not going to have a weird repeating pattern in the wall. All right, so it looks good, but we've got these vertical stripes here that are a little darker. I'm not quite sure if I like that. Maybe you like it, so if you do, you can just leave it where it's at. But I'm just going to try something really quick. I'm going to change the projection to flat. And I'm going to take and select the material plus the wood paneling here, and I'm going to grab the texture axis tool again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it, because you can see the dark spots that are for the water staining, they need to be down towards the bottom. So let's grab the rotate tool, flip that 90 degrees, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off tiling, and I'm just going to scale this up. So we'll scale that up. And I'm going to take this and pull it over to one side. And let's turn tiling back on to see what happens. Alright, so there we're getting some tiling, of course, because the texture just kind of abruptly gets cut off. So one thing that you could do is you could take the texture into Photoshop and just extend it, and that would work. Or what we could try to do is just scale it up. I'm not really sure how that's going to look, but we can try it. So we'll turn off tile, and we'll just scale this up until it covers the entire wall. So maybe what we need to do is go to another view here, and let's turn off the yard and the green, and let's change the display. Okay, so I'm just going to scale this up until it fits the wall, and then I'm just going to push this up to where the water spots on the bottom are going to hit the ground. So I need the arrow here, just pull that down until those spots hit the ground. Now by scaling this up, what I'm hoping that we didn't do is cause a problem with the texture being too large, and then the texture looks rather low res because we scaled it up too much. So I'm just going to render that little region there one more time just to make sure that the wood texture looks okay. Okay, so there's the wood texture, and just by scaling it up, it still looks good, so we don't have to be concerned about the scaling issue. We can get started now with the paneling part of the house. So we'll just make a new V-Ray shader again. And for the diffuse layer, we're going to load in the concrete texture here. So we'll load that in. And if you feel as though this is too plain, because if we look at the texture up close, you can see there is some variation in it. So it's not exactly completely all gray. You can see there is some noise in there. But if you feel like you want to bring that noise out a little bit more, what we could do is while we have the texture loaded here, if we'll just click on, let's see, we want to click on filter and then go into the filter shader. Concrete texture automatically loads itself, and what we could do is enable the clipping, and we can just play around here with the clipping some, and you can see what we're doing. We're actually bringing out more of that noise. So I think that looks pretty good. So we'll just leave that just like it is there, and what we could do is we could take and copy the filter shader from here and paste that over here into the specular layer. We're going to need to turn off reflection, and now we can just paste it in here to the specular color. And let's see if that really did anything at all. So let's take the mix strength and just go down with it. Okay, so you can see it is making a little bit of a difference. So if you want to see more of a difference, you can take the specular layer transparency option and you can just bring that down, and you can see now it's really starting to pop. So that's a little too much. So let's take it to 80 and maybe 85. Okay, so if you bring this value here, the mix strength down, if you bring that value down, okay, you can see it's just more diffuse now, and if we take that up, now it just kind of tones itself down. So that's fine for now. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to rename this to concrete wall. Actually, it's for the paneling. So we can click on the paneling, and we need to go find the paneling. Okay, that's the upper paneling. So we'll just take this new concrete material, drop it over to the paneling, and more than likely we may need to change the projection on this because that's looking a little strange. So let's take the upper paneling and select both the object and the material, change the projection to cubic, and let's grab the texture axis tool again just to make sure that the scale is going to look okay. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just scale this up a little bit. So maybe something like that. Alright, so we'll jump into our camera, and what I'll do is I'll just render an upper region. So let's render maybe something like right there. Okay, so you can see we're getting some noise in there. Some of that, of course, is because of the low anti-aliasing. The other part is because we're using a low quality GI setting, but also some of that is attributed to the concrete texture because we use the filter shader to kind of bring that noise out. So this is really dependent upon whether you want the noise in there or not. So for now, we'll just leave it the way it is, or what we could do is just tone it down a little bit. So we'll go into the diffuse layer, and we'll go back to the filter shader, and we can just kind of, you can click on enable clipping to disable that, or you can just play around with these values here just to kind of tone that down a little bit. Alright, so just one more thing that we want to go over here, and that is we need to create some type of a metal texture that's going to go on the framing for the windows. It's also going to go on the framing for the stairs, the railing, and the little borders, and the framing for these lower doors here. So creating something like that is fairly simple. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create another V-Ray advanced material. For the diffuse layer, I'm just going to maybe load in a grayish type color. I'm going to turn on Specular layer 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the highlight glossiness and go up with that to maybe 0.8. And the trace reflection option I'm going to leave on. But for the reflection glossiness, I'm going to bring this down to maybe 0.75. Or let's try 0.8. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is take the amount, and I want to go down with that because I want to bring out more of a reflection because this is going to be a metal type material. So that looks pretty good there. The only thing I don't like is that hotspot. So let's take the highlight glossiness and let's take that up to maybe 0.95. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a little hit of specular there. And it's kind of small, so I'm going to bring this down to maybe something like, let's go down a little bit more, maybe 0.9, and I think that will be just fine. Okay, so this is going to be our diffused metal shader. So we're going to apply this to the framing of the house, or not the framing of the house, I'm sorry, the framing of the windows. So let's click on those and go find them. So we have framing. So we have the framing here, and I just want to make sure that all these framing objects in here are going to be the correct object. So we have the framing. Okay, the upper floor framing is something that we don't want to put anything to, so I'm just going to take that out. That probably needs to be a different type of shader on that. So for now, we'll just leave it out. We have the roof framing, which does not need to be a metal type texture. And let's select all of these here. That's just for the windows, that's fine. More window framing, sliding door framing. Okay, so far all of these are just fine. It's going to be these two objects up here that I'm not really going to be too concerned about at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just take the metal shader and start applying it. But what I could do to make it easier on myself is just select all of these, select the material that we want to use, and go to Edit, or I'm sorry, we want to go to Function, Apply. Alright, so we'll just go in here and render one more little region, and then I'm going to stop this part, and we'll continue on with the next part. Okay, so you can see that these metal textures look really nice, and the render time went up a little bit because we're using reflection, plus we're blurring it, plus we have the area light, plus we also have the blurred transparency on the windows. So the render time you can see down here was 1 minute and 50 seconds. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and save it, And then I'm going to go ahead and stop this part, and we'll continue on in the next part with just getting everything together and finalizing it for the final render.